for coming here today. We appreciate your insights as always. Dr. Winship, let's start with you. As you're aware, policy decisions and policy changes affect decisions at the margin. The individuals who are on the edge of perhaps dropping out of the labor force are in many instances facing a difficult set of questions, questions involving whether or not to work one more day or to spend one more day looking for work, based on a determination as to whether these kinds of efforts are worth it relative to retirement, considering ways possibly to justify an SDI claim. You've written before that on the subject of SSDI and the sometimes perverse incentives that workers on the margins may face when presented with an opportunity to make a claim on SSDI. With the SSDI trust fund set to run out of money next year, what, if any, policy reforms might you suggest that could improve workforce participation, particularly at the margins?
Thank you, Senator. I think it's a really important question. The reforms that I propose in the article that I've written for National Affairs on this range from you could create markets for private long-term unemployment insurance. I think SSDI has become really a long-term unemployment program for folks who, if depending on economic circumstances, would be employable. They're not actually disabled in that sense. I think we could do things like experiment with experience rating of payroll taxes for employers. That is to say, if a lot of your employers go on to receive SSDI, then your share of the payroll tax would actually be higher. Now, if you do that, you have to allow employers to also be able to get involved in the determination of eligibility for their former employees. So I think it's sort of a big step. You can toughen eligibility requirements for people who are applying. You can make it easier for people who are actually disabled and on SSDI to work, while at the same time making it more difficult for people who aren't disabled in the sense of not being able to work by having more reviews of eligibility. So I think there's a range of things you could do. You could update the listing of occupations which the Social Security Administration uses to determine whether there are jobs out there that people could do. So I lay out a dozen or so different proposals in this piece I've written.
Oh, thank you. Employers are facing a slew of new regulatory challenges from the NLRB's joint employer rule to the Department of Labor's proposed rule, proposed overtime standards that came out at the end of the month, last month. How do you think these rules will ultimately impact the job market in general through the burdens that they add to the employers, taking into account that employers are half of the equation here?
Yeah, I think just like the minimum wage debate that's happening right now, I think any time that you increase the costs that employers have to pay for their workers, you face a real risk of helping some people who benefit from it, but at the same time hurting a lot of people who don't get the benefits of dynamic job growth in the future. I think we have to be really careful, and this is a case too where I think a lot of the statistics about stagnating wages have been overstated, and we actually treat the problem as in some ways different than what it actually is.
Dr. Mothra, I saw you nodding. Do you have anything to add to that in particular?
On the overtime rules, we actually have good research looking at the impact of the proposed overtime regulations or changes in overtime regulations and the effect on worker hours and worker wages. And there are two good studies out there that I found that basically said that when you have overtime, when you're required to pay workers, time and a half for every hour that they work over 40 hours a week, the employer either cuts down the base wage, or if they're already at minimum wage, they cut down their hours. So even though we know that these rules are out there to help workers, I think that in the long run, there could be potential negative unintended consequences for the workers that they're trying to help.
For a minute there, I thought you might be making a plug for the Working Families Flexibility Act, which I would make a plug for, but for the fact that I'm out of time. But since I'm out of time, I'm not going to make a plug for the Working Families Flexibility Act, which would help us a lot. Thank you very much for your answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dr. Adams.